Okay, so network states, right?
Yeah.
It's an interesting concept, but I'm getting some like seriously dystopian vibes from all this. Reading through Balaji Srinivasan's book, The Network State, kind of left me feeling a little uneasy.
I think that's fair.
It's like, is this just a way for the super rich to secede from reality and create their own little fiefdoms?
Well, it's interesting how he frames some pretty alarming scenarios as positive outcomes.
Yeah.
He uses all these historical parallels, like the founding of America, to argue that network states are just like this natural progression, this inevitable evolution of societies.
Yeah, he paints this picture of like online communities banding together, creating their own systems of governance, and eventually claiming physical territory. Like it's just the next logical step or something.
Right.
And he talks about attracting people to like a shared ideology first.
Yeah.
And then building a society around that, which like on the surface sounds great, kind of utopian.
Yeah. Yeah, and then he throws in these examples almost casually that make you wonder if he's fully grasped the implications.
Right.
Like he mentions the Soviet Union's control over information and resources. Like he acknowledges the dangers of centralized power, but then he proposes a system that just seems so ripe for abuse by a new kind of elite.
It's giving major Silicon Valley billionaire escaping to a private islands vibes.
Exactly.
Like, is this just a way for them to dodge taxes and create their own little libertarian paradises?
Yeah, and the whole one commandment thing for each network state is little
creepy.
Yeah, like on the one hand, you can say, okay, having a clear unifying principle could foster a sense of community.
Yeah.
But it also just reeks of exclusion and potential for discrimination.
It's like, who gets to decide what that one commandment is?
Right.
And what happens to the people who don't agree with it?
Yeah. Are they just out of luck?
Yeah. And then there's the whole financial aspect.
Right.
He's adamant about the need for an integrated cryptocurrency for each network state to manage everything from assets to citizen records. But, I mean, that just screams potential for financial control and exclusion. Like, what about people who can't afford to buy into this crypto utopia?
Exactly.
Are they automatically, like, relegated to second-class citizenship?
Right.
Or worse, completely shut out?
And who controls the value of that cryptocurrency? Who gets to set the rules?
Right.
It's not hard to imagine a scenario where a handful of early adopters, the ones with the most wealth, essentially become the new oligarchs, calling all the shots.
So instead of traditional governments, we're talking about unelected techno-elites wielding immense power. And that's not even getting into his whole American anarchy prediction. It's like he's almost gleeful about the potential for the U.S. to descend into chaos.
It's very strange.
Yeah, he portrays this scenario where the U.S. crumbles under economic hardship and ideological clashes. And guess who gets to ride off into the sunset?
The wealthy, of course.
The wealthy.
Escaping to their shiny new network states, while the rest of us are left to deal with the fallout.
It's like he's suggesting that the collapse of existing systems is a good thing because it will pave the way for these network states to emerge.
Exactly.
But what about the people who can't afford to buy their way into this new world order?
Right.
What happens to them?
He doesn't really address that.
Yeah. He kind of glosses over that.
Like he's so focused on this grand vision of technological disruption that he forgets about the very real human cost.
Right. And let's not forget his comparison of the potential chaos in the U.S. with China's model of tight control.
Yeah.
That was a bit unsettling. He paints this picture of Chinese citizens being trapped, unable to leave or move their assets.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying, hey, it could be worse.
Exactly.
You could be living under an authoritarian regime.
Right, like be grateful for what you have.
Right.
Even if what you have is potentially this dystopian network state.
Yeah, it's almost as if he's trying to present network states as the lesser of two evils. But even if we accept that premise, we're still left with a system that seems designed to benefit a select few at the expense of the many.
Yeah.
And this whole blurring of digital and physical space just adds another layer of complexity.
Absolutely.
He envisions network states controlling actual territories around the world, all connected through the internet. It just sounds like a recipe for jurisdictional nightmares.
Oh, yeah. Whose laws apply? Who gets to make the rules? What happens to the people who already live in these territories?
Right.
It's all very vague.
Yeah.
Which is precisely what makes it so concerning.
Okay, so we've got potential for financial exclusion, erosion of public infrastructure, and a whole lot of unanswered questions about governance and jurisdiction. It's starting to feel less like utopia and more like a dystopian nightmare. Like we're headed towards some kind of techno-feudalism.
Exactly.
Where the super rich are the lords and the rest of us are the serfs.
Yeah, and we haven't even touched on how this all plays out in terms of resources and power dynamics.
Yeah.
We need to unpack those aspects next, because that's where things get really interesting. And by interesting, I mean terrifying.
All right, let's take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Get ready to explore just how deep this rabbit hole goes.
Buckle up.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Daily Mind Brew podcast. Democracy isn't a spectator sport. Check out the podcast summary for key takeaways and actions you can take to be a defender of democracy today. And now, back to the conversation.
So let's talk about how Srinivasan sees network states like challenging the power of traditional nation states.
Okay.
He sees technology, especially cryptocurrencies, as like this liberating force, you know, shifting power away from established entities and towards these decentralized networks.
Okay, but doesn't it feel like we're just swapping one set of shackles for another?
Yeah.
Like instead of governments, we'll have these techno elites calling all the shots, and they might be even less accountable.
That's the crux of it. He seems to gloss over the potential for conflict in this power shift.
Yeah.
And when you consider the vast wealth and resources these network states could accumulate, it's not hard to imagine them like throwing their weight around.
Yeah.
Maybe even resorting to some shady tactics to get what they want.
He keeps emphasizing the need for a strong financial foundation for these network states.
Yeah.
It's like he's envisioning them becoming these economic powerhouses, dwarfing traditional nations in terms of wealth.
Right.
What happens when a network state decides it wants to expand its holdings?
Right.
Maybe acquire more land or resources.
Yeah.
Do they just like negotiate politely with neighboring countries?
He doesn't really address that, does he?
No.
It's more likely they'd use their financial clout to strong-arm weaker nations. Maybe even fund private armies to enforce their will.
It's all starting to feel very dystopian.
Yeah.
Like something out of a cyberpunk novel? Are we really talking about creating societies that are essentially run by oligarchs?
Right.
With a tech-savvy veneer?
It's a legitimate concern, and one that he doesn't adequately address.
Yeah.
He talks a big game about innovation and new forms of governance.
Right.
But it's hard to see how those innovations would benefit anyone
other
than the elite few who are already calling the shots.
And this whole concept of digital sovereignty just adds another layer of unease.
Oh, absolutely.
He presents it as this empowering thing.
Yeah.
You know, a way for individuals to break free from the control of traditional governments. But what if it's just an illusion?
Right. What if we're just trading one form of control for another, one that's even less transparent and accountable?
Like, remember how he talks about a network state's integrated cryptocurrency managing all sorts of personal data?
Oh, yeah.
That doesn't exactly scream individual liberty?
No, not at all.
It's more like handing over your entire digital life to a private entity.
Right.
And who's to say how that data will be used?
Exactly.
Will it be sold to the highest bidder? Will it be used to manipulate or control citizens?
Right.
These are questions he conveniently sidesteps.
He seems to have this blind faith in technology as a force for good.
Yeah.
But he fails to grapple with the very real potential for abuse.
Right.
Especially when you concentrate so much power in the hands of a select few.
So even if a network state starts with noble intentions, there's a real possibility it could devolve into a system where the wealthy elite control the finances, the technology, and ultimately the lives of its citizens.
That's the danger we need to be aware of.
Yeah.
He paints this rosy picture of network states as the solution to the world's problems.
Right.
But he seems to forget that power corrupts.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether it's wielded by a government or a tech CEO.
And it's not just about controlling information and resources.
Right.
He also talks about network states having their own rules and norms, even within the territories of existing nation states.
Yeah.
He calls it digital sovereignty, but it sounds a lot like creating a state within a state.
Yeah.
Operating by its own set of laws.
Right. And if those laws are designed to benefit the wealthy and powerful within the network state, we're talking about a system where justice is for sale.
Right.
Imagine a network state deciding it doesn't have to follow the laws of the country where it's physically located.
Basically, they could just operate with impunity.
Exactly.
Accountable to no one but themselves.
And with their vast wealth and technological capabilities, they could become these rogue entities posing a serious threat to global stability.
So we're talking about the rise of digital warlords.
Right.
This is a far cry from the utopian vision he's selling.
It is.
It's a stark reminder that technology can be used for both good and ill. And when it comes to network states, we need to be incredibly cautious about the potential for ill, especially the risk of creating systems that further empower the wealthy and exacerbate existing inequalities.
It's not about rejecting innovation or progress. It's about ensuring that those innovations benefit all of humanity, not just a select few.
And that requires a critical eye.
Absolutely.
A willingness to question assumptions and a commitment to holding those in power accountable.
Because if we don't, we could be paving the way for a future where the digital world is ruled by a new class of oligarchs. And that's a future we need to avoid at all costs.
Okay, so we've established that network states could be incredibly dangerous if they fall into the wrong hands. But what about the safeguards he proposes? Surely he's considered the potential for abuse and come up with some mechanisms to prevent it.
Well, he does touch upon a few potential safeguards. But even those raise some serious red flags. For instance, he talks about the role of chains in managing cooperation and constraint.
Chains? Like literal chains?
No, he's referring to public blockchains.
Okay.
He sees them as a kind of international law, a way to foster collaboration between network states while also limiting their individual power.
Okay, so like checks and balances, making sure no one entity gets too powered.
Exactly. But then he throws in this curveball.
Okay.
He suggests that Bitcoin, or a similar cryptocurrency, would act as a kind of ultimate authority, a government of governments that sits above all states and prevents them from overstepping their bounds.
Wait, so a decentralized system that keeps everyone in check? Even the network states themselves? That sounds complicated.
It is, and it raises a whole host of new questions.
Like what?
For starters, who controls Bitcoin? Who gets to decide how it operates? Is it truly a neutral force? Or could it be manipulated by those with the most wealth and technological expertise?
I mean, we've already seen how volatile and unpredictable cryptocurrencies can be. It's not hard to imagine a group of wealthy individuals or a powerful network state finding a way to game the system. Manipulating Bitcoin to their advantage.
Precisely. And then you're right back where you started with the small, unelected elite controlling a system that's supposed to be decentralized and equitable.
It's a classic case of meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
Exactly.
Just with a shiny new technological wrapper.
And then there's his whole concept of the digital world becoming primary and the physical world secondary. It's like he's envisioning a future where all meaningful events happen online and the real world is just an afterthought.
He talks about printing out events from the digital realm into the physical world, as if reality is just some kind of optional add-on.
It's a fascinating concept, but it also raises some serious concerns about accessibility and equity.
Like what happens to people who can't afford to participate in this digital first world? Do they just become irrelevant?
It's a valid concern and one that he doesn't seem too bothered by. If network states are built on this assumption that the digital realm reigns supreme, it could create a system that's inherently biased towards the wealthy and technologically savvy.
He keeps talking about dividing the world by networks rather than land. But what if those networks are controlled by the same people?
Exactly.
Who control the wealth and the technology?
Then you're not creating a utopian society. You're creating a digital feudal system. The techno-elite rule over their digital fiefdoms with the rest of us as their digital serfs.
It's a pretty grim picture he's painting.
It is.
Even with the supposed safeguards he proposes.
It's almost as if he's so enamored with the potential of technology that he's blind to the potential for abuse.
So we're talking about a system that could easily concentrate even more wealth and power in the hands of a select few with very little accountability. It's like the ultimate escape hatch for the super rich.
Right. He talks about network states eventually gaining diplomatic recognition from existing countries.
Yeah.
Like he envisions them becoming these legitimate players on the global stage.
So hold on, doesn't that create a whole new set of problems?
Yeah.
What happens when a network state gets recognized but then starts engaging in activities that harm other countries or their citizens?
Yeah.
Who holds them accountable?
It's a huge blind spot in his argument. He just assumes that network states will act in good faith.
Yeah.
But history shows us that power, even when decentralized, can be incredibly corrupting.
So we could end up with these rogue network states operating with impunity, accountable to no one but themselves.
Right.
And with their vast wealth and technological capabilities, they could become a serious threat to global stability.
Exactly.
It's like we're talking about the rise of digital warlords.
It's a chilling thought, and one that he doesn't seem to grapple with.
Right.
He's so caught up in the potential for disruption and innovation that he fails to consider the very real potential for harm.
It's like he's completely overlooking the dark side of human nature.
Yeah.
The greed, the lust for power, the willingness to exploit others for personal gain. Those things don't just disappear because you create a shiny new technological system.
Right. And that's why this whole concept of network states needs to be approached with extreme caution.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just talk about the potential benefits. We need to be brutally honest about the risks, especially the risk of creating a world where the wealthy elite can simply buy their way out of any accountability.
It's like we're being sold a utopian dream without any acknowledgement of the potential nightmare it could become. And frankly, after digging into this book, I'm feeling a lot less optimistic and a lot more concerned.
I hear you. It's crucial to remember that technology is a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for evil.
Right.
And when it comes to network states, the potential for evil is very real.
So what does this all mean for you as you continue to explore the world of network states? Remember what we've discussed today. Don't get swept up in the hype about innovation and digital sovereignty.
Right.
Look beyond the shiny promises and ask the tough questions.
Yeah.
Who benefits from this system? Who gets left behind?
Right.
And most importantly, who holds the power?
Yeah.
Because the future is still being written. And it's up to all of us to ensure it doesn't become a techno-feudalist dystopia.
Right.
Ruled by a new class of oligarchs.
A very important point.
Stay vigilant, stay informed, and stay engaged.